Hi guys, I'm outside, which is unusual, I know. Why am I outside? Because my wife's bush is out of control. I shouldn't say that. The plant is out of control. Now the wife sent me to B&Q the other day to get some trellis to go over here because we can't open the gate at the minute. Yeah, I didn't like it. £39? I'm not paying that. £6? That'll do. That's right, I'm Ty. I refuse to spend £40 or £50 on a piece of trellis. I'm going to instead use this decking board that I got for under a tenner. Now I'm going to have to use a table saw, and I promise to try harder to use it in a safer way than the last video. But my plan, I think I can get 3 strips out of this. And out of just one board I can build one bit of trellis, which gives me the second board to build another bit of trellis, which the wife hasn't even asked for. Brownie points. So I'll start by cutting that board down to a more manageable length. Now this is the rough length of the gap that I need to span. I'm wearing a respirator here because I don't trust all that green chemically stuff on the board. Over at the table saw of death, I've set the width to about 30mm. Now I should, in theory, accounting for the width of the blade, get 3 equalish sized strips out of this. Now I'm doing my absolute best here to be a bit safer. I really have taken on board everything you guys said from my last video where I used the table saw. Trying to use a push stick on both sides, not just one. Trying to keep myself orientated behind that board so that there's no pull to the left or to the right. I've got my respirator on still because of the chemicals, and I've got my full face visor, which actually saved a bit of an injury here. As I was running the board through, a knot in the wood did pop off. If I hadn't have had my visor on, it would have hit me in the face. Couldn't really tell how hard it would have hit me, you know, because of my super villain mask. Although I'd make a really bad super villain. So this part of the video it might get a little bit complicated because I can't really explain what I'm doing. But I'm cutting at about 15 degrees there. That's because my garage wall doesn't fit perpendicular to the gate. The gate is attached at a 15-degree angle. So one of these lengths has got to be slightly longer than the other. So I'm going to use a tape measure, I'm cutting them at 15 degrees so that it'll sit flush to my garage wall. Now, if you haven't got a weird angle to work with, you can skip this step. If you're giving this a try at home, then I can recommend buying that cheap length of decking board and cutting it down using a table saw, because this is way sturdier than trellis ever could be. I've got a bit of a problem. I want mine to go up almost at a bit of an arch, a half arch if you like. A bit like my approach to woodworking, half arched. Anyway, I digress. But I've also got the problem that the gate doesn't sit perpendicular to the wall. There is a 15-degree angle. So that's why I've had to cut these at 15 degrees because one is going to sit further away from the wall. Then to get my half arch, that's about as much as I want. Why am I bothering? Well, because I don't want the trellis to sit on top of the gate, otherwise the plant's just going to get in the way of the gate again. And the way I've measured it, that should give about half a foot of clearance. Perfect. So with the 2 sidey parts done, I decided I would work next on the rungs of the ladder. I'm going to keep calling this a ladder because that's the style of trellis I'm going for. We don't need something for things to completely weave in and out of. It's basically just to keep the plant from getting in the way of the gate. So I've set up a little stop block and all I'm doing is cutting the rungs to exactly the same lengths. With those cut, I've used a spacer block to separate all of my rungs, and then I'm just using a pencil just to mark on each rung and each side part where to drill. That way if anything gets knocked or I move things around or I shuffle around like I am doing, then I know exactly where to drill. With everything held in place, I use the clamps to make sure it's not going to move. Now the clamps are literally just there so that as I'm drilling there's no vibration that's going to knock anything or move anything. Everything held in place, I use a countersunk bit to pre-drill all of the holes. I'm going to be using just plain old decking screws for this, mainly because I've got a load left over and they do tend to last a little bit longer than regular wood screws. Ideally I'd use some stainless steel screws for this, but I didn't have any and I'm trying to do this on a budget. Before I go ahead and drill everything, because I've got those lines on there and know where it's all going to go, I just put a little dollop of Gorilla exterior wood glue on there. Now I've never really used this stuff and it looks like just regular PVA to me, but it says on the tub it's for exterior use, so I'm just going to have faith.
It's like a little gnome ladder. No, I don't dare. But here you can see what I was talking about. Now that is the angle of my wall. Maybe a mil out, a degree out, but it'll do.
To be able to attach this to the vertical wall, I need a batten right at the end that I can just drill through, screw through. But of course I'm working with an angle here. Rather than trying to find the angle and adjusting the miter saw, I literally just drew the angle on using the piece for reference. Then the miter saw, I just swiveled the miter saw until it lined up with those lines that I'd marked. After that, you know the deal, pre-drill, bit of glue, and the other thing I'm going to do is put 2 holes in here. I've got to attach this to the wall, so I figured now would be a good time. For attaching the arch part of the trellis, I'm using a slightly wider bit of wood. I'm holding it at that angle and putting 2 screws through. I'm using plenty of glue and I plan on reinforcing this tomorrow, but I don't want to mess around with it while the glue's drying. This was a little bit fiddly as I couldn't use clamps or anything. I just literally had to hold it in place while I pre-drilled and screwed everything together, but it actually worked out surprisingly well. For the opposite end of the trellis, the part that's going to sit on the wall, I did exactly the same, but I didn't use wood glue. I want to be able to rotate that piece because that's going to sit flat against the wall and it would give me a nice surface to screw into.
So as always, I make no apologies if you came to this channel looking for advanced woodworking. Pfft, fools! This has got to serve a purpose. I'm going to let it dry up overnight. I'm using Gorilla exterior wood glue. I've never used it before, so I don't really know how long to leave it. But I'm going to leave this overnight. In the meantime, I've got a whole length of board left to use. So I'm going to make my wife an extra present. One that she didn't ask for. They're always the ones that go down well, aren't they?
This is the only footage you're going to see of this because I cannot tell you how simple it is to do. Using that same method as before with the table saw to cut down the strips, I set them out at the sort of angle that I wanted. I got some battens, laid them across, used a spacer block and then literally just screwed and glued everything together.
I've just had a thought. Didn't check how long those screws were. This would obviously be the first time I've ever nailed or screwed anything to the bench. Phew. So here it is. My very, very basic looking trellis. Now the thing about this one is things aren't going to weave in and out. There's a rose bush against this, or where it's going to be. So we need something to be able to tie the roses onto so that they don't fall over. I don't know anything about plants. I play with wood. I do trees. Anyway, I'm going to let this dry overnight. Again, never used Gorilla Glue. Don't know how long it's going to take. But this took like 10 minutes. And I've seen these at the garden centre. Like 30 quid. Although, what price do you put on your time?
Masonry work or drilling into any kind of wall is not my forte, so I'm not going to tell you how to do anything here. All I'll tell you is I'm using an SDS drill after marking out where those holes are going to be. After that, I put a plug in each hole, and then a tip I was taught by the father-in-law is you tap a screw into that plug so it just sinks about 1 mil in. And then you take the screw out and screw everything together. The other side was not so easy. I had this giant honeysuckle, as I've just been told it's called, fighting against me. It was not playing ball. So what does it look like? Well, that's the little bit of trellis with the rose in front of it. I haven't tied it back yet. Roses scare me, they've got thorns. And then that's the honeysuckle with the trellis going over the gate. I've always said, it doesn't need to look pretty as long as it works. So there it is. My very simple but very cheap trellis. In the end, that cost me about £5. Still got a lot of bush left to trim though. I can get through my gate. Ta-da! Thank you so much for watching. See you in the next one. No, wait, I should have said that's a cut.